Hello friends, my name is Jess and welcome back to my channel, Books Past Bedtime. Today we're going to be doing my September wrap-up. Now, September was a pretty average reading month for me. I ended up attempting to read 14 things and finishing 13. So we're going to talk about all of those books today. I'll give you mini reviews on all of them, let you know which ones are worth reading. But first, as always, we're going to talk about my reading stats for the month of September. So in September, as I mentioned, I read 14 books. Well, one of those was a DNF, but across those 14 books, I read 4,874 pages. I listened to just shy of 30 hours of audiobooks, clocking in at 29.35. My average rating for the month was kind of low at 3.62. For most of this year, it's trended around like 3.8 to 4 stars, so it's pretty low this month, which is sad, but that's okay. I haven't been tracking the books that I buy or the books I get from the library, so that is not accurate, but I did reread 2 books this month, and I also read 2 books that could be considered own voices as far as I know. In terms of genre, this is pretty typical for me. I read the most romance books this month, as has been the case all year. 11 total romance books read in September. I read 1 fantasy book and 1 thriller. A lot of my romance books this month, though, were fantasy romance books, so I feel like the fantasy category is definitely my highest subgenre in September, so I feel like just having 1 book in that category is not super accurate, but I try and track the like #1 genre first. Oh, I also have 1 paranormal book, which I don't know what that is. I also read quite a few paranormal romances though, so I don't know, I must have thought 1 was more paranormal than romance. As far as the format in which I consumed these books, 3 of them were via audio, 8 were via ebook, and 3 of these books I read physically. In terms of the audience of the books that I read, 12 were adult books, pretty typical for me, and I also read 1 YA and 1 new adult book. Looking at the identity of the authors that I read this month, I read 1 book by a male author, 11 books by female authors, 1 book by a transgender author, and 1 by an author that uses they them pronouns. My author status stats are interesting this month, so I didn't read any debut books, but I read an even split of books from authors that were new to me and books from authors that I had read before, 7 of each. And then last but not least, looking at my ratings for the month, I only rated 1 book 5 stars this month, which is kind of sad, but I did have 3 4.5 star books, so those are like almost perfect. Really enjoyed them books, so that is good. I also had 3 books that I rated 4 stars and 3 books that I rated 3.5 stars, so the majority of my books this month I did enjoy them. I just didn't have a month of reading like a ton of new favorites. There were 0 books that I gave 3 stars to, 1 book that I gave 2.5 stars to, 1 book that got a flat 2 stars, 1 book that got 1.5 stars, and then 1 book that I DNF'd this month. And those are all my reading stats for September. Like I said, it was a pretty average, pretty typical reading month for me. I'm really crossing my fingers that October, November, and December will be above average reading months for me because I still need to knock out my reading goal. I am about a little over 50 books away from it right now, so I better crank those out in the next 3 months, but I think I can do it. I'm like basically on track. I'm just like 1 or 2 behind, so we're doing good. But those were my stats for September, and let's jump into talking about the books that I actually read. I have been doing this the last couple months. I'm going to rank them in order of how I liked them. So I'm gonna start with the worst book and finish off the video with the best book. If you only read 1 book from this video, you should read that one. But yeah, let's just jump right into it. So of course, the first book that I have to talk about is the book that I DNF'd this month, and that was A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is I want to say a Dracula retelling. We're basically following our main character, Constanta, and Constanta is the first bride of Dracula. He kind of like saves her from peasantry and marries her. I don't know. He turns her into a vampire. They are like being vampires together, and then I think Dracula ends up marrying some other brides, and Constanta is like jealous at first, but then they realize that Dracula is evil and they like team up to defeat him. I think that's what this book is about. Honestly, I got like 50% of the way through it and none of those things happened, so if there's spoilers, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure they're in the description. And I don't know, I've heard so many people rave about this book, but I just really wasn't feeling it. I started listening to the audiobook actually back in June, and I just really have never had the desire to pick it back up again. I was really bored with the story. Nothing much happened. I didn't connect to Constanta very much as a character, and I didn't really care about the story. I just thought it was kind of weird and it didn't click for me, so I just finally ended up DNFing it this month, clearing it out of my currently reading. At first I was just soft DNFing it because I thought maybe I would come back to it, maybe start it over and finish the whole thing at some point in the future, because I feel like I've heard good reviews for it. But when I said I DNF'd it, quite a few friends messaged me and were like, no, like this book's bad, don't read it. So honestly, it's turned into a hard DNF at this point. I probably won't pick it up again. Now, the worst book that I actually finished in September was The Dragon Prince's Daddy. by Lorelei Hart, Trisha Lindy, and Colby Dunbar. I don't know how 3 people could work on this book and it still turned out so bad, but it did. Honestly, what could I possibly expected from this book? Like, I guess I didn't expect it to be like mind-blowing, obviously, but I still like wanted it to be a smutty good time and it wasn't. So I was very disappointed by this. This is the book that got 1.5 stars from me. So this book is basically a paranormal romance. Both of our main characters are dragon shifters. This book is also set in the Omegaverse, so we have alphas and omegas. Our main character Chance is an omega. He's the youngest prince of this kingdom and he's a little bit reckless, so his dad, the king, hires this bodyguard for him who turns out to be an alpha and is someone that Chance hooked up with before previously, and they have this connection. They're really drawn to each other, but of course work and professionalism takes precedence at first. It's a tale as old as time. I just did not think that this one was very well done. All of the characters were so like surface level. They had no depth. There was no character growth. There was really no plot. Chance, our main character, was super immature, and this was just not a compelling story. Like, I guess I had fun when I was reading it, but it just really was not good. It was not well written. It just wasn't really what I wanted. I feel like with a book like this, if it's good, it's like a 3.5 star book. Like, it's purely for smut purposes. Like, I like to connect to and root for the characters still, and I like to have some semblance of a plot and a reason for reading the book, and this just didn't have any of those elements I look for, and like the smut wasn't that great anyway. Yeah, 1.5 stars. This was not a good book. I would not recommend. The next book on my list might come as a shock to you if you don't follow me on Instagram or Goodreads, but that is Neon Gods by Katie Robert. I'm actually reading this in a reading vlog, so I don't want to talk too much about it because I go into depth on my thoughts in that video, and that should be out very soon, this week or next. But I ended up reading this book 2 stars. I thought it was rushed. I didn't think it was super well written. I didn't love the insta love, and the overuse of the word pussy, just, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't deal with it. So those are the main reasons why I didn't like this book. But again, I'm going to talk about it more in depth in an upcoming reading vlog, so definitely look out for that if you are interested. I'm going to be reading the whole series. So, and I didn't mention what this one was about. It is a modern day Hades and Persephone retelling. I feel like that's really all you need to know. Next on my list is The Witch's Familiar by TJ Nichols. This is another paranormal shifter romance. I'm also not sure what I expected going into this one. This one, I will say, was better than the other one, but it still like wasn't that great. I think I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. It was fun. It was just very forgettable and not super compelling. So basically we're following our main character Jude, and he is deemed a danger to the supernatural community. He is a witch, and so he's sent by the witch council to this small town to investigate this monster that's killing people in this town. They think maybe it's like a wolf shifter or something. Jude is very much a city boy, so having to like investigate something in the woods of this small town is not his vibe, but he meets Rob, who's like the local mechanic and a local wolf shifter. Jude thinks that Rob is the one tearing up these animals and things, but after that misunderstanding is cleared up, they end up teaming up and working together to figure out what is going on. This book has the fated mates trope, and it's also like kind of Grumpy Sunshine a little bit, and it's also small town romance vibes for sure. Like I said, fun, cute, not the best written, not the most memorable book, a very middle of the road 2.5 stars. Another fairly average book that I read in September was Claimed by the Orc Prince by Lionel Hart. For a book with this title that seems kind of aggressive, this was actually like a super sweet cinnamon roll of a romance book. In this book, we follow Prince Tegan, who is a prince of the elves, I guess, and Zorvit, who is a prince of the orcs, and these two have like an arranged marriage to bring their 2 kingdoms together. Naturally, I love an arranged marriage trope, so that's why I picked this one up. I also enjoy a monster / paranormal romance, so another reason I picked this one up. I'm pretty glad I did. I think I gave this one 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. It's super short. It's only like 150 pages, so it's a really quick novella, and I really enjoyed seeing Tegan and Zorvit like come to an understanding about each other's cultures and customs and really come to care for each other and develop this really sweet, communicative, supportive relationship. I really enjoyed it. It was such a cute romance, and there is kind of an extenuating like political plot going on in the background, which kept it pretty exciting. And this is a series. This is the first book. There are 2 more in the series following the same characters, so it will be interesting to see where the story goes. But this first one was fairly good, fairly average. I feel like I can't give it a much higher rating because it was so short. It was pretty simplistic, but overall, it was a decent read. Next is kind of a twofer. I'm going to put Lost and Bound and Lost Touch by Elliot Grayson. These are books 4 and 5 in her Mist Matte Mismatched Mates series. That's hard to say. And these were the last two books that are currently out in that series that I needed to read, so I did end up reading these in September. They were okay. I think the series is a fun time, and I enjoy the characters, and I enjoy the world that it's set in, but these two were not my favorites in the series by any means. Actually, I really did like Lost and Bound, but Lost Touch was not as good. I gave Lost and Bound, actually, I think 4 stars, and I gave Lost Touch 3.5. So basically, this is a paranormal romance series set in the world of vampires and werewolves. Most of the books follow werewolf main characters, but there are 1 or 2 that have vampire main characters. And in Lost and Bound, we're following the cousin of one of the other main characters in one of the other books. Each book follows like a different couple. In Lost and Bound, we're following Jared and Calder, who are both wolf shifters, and they were both captured and imprisoned together in the same prison, and they escape together. And after this, they kind of feel this connection with one another. They feel like they owe each other their lives. It's like a mating of convenience kind of thing, because werewolves are stronger once they mate, so they did that so that they could escape the prison easier. But then after they do escape, they still have this bond and feel this bond, but they don't really necessarily have a reason to still be together, so there's that conflict, and that's basically what this book's about. I just really liked Jared and Calder as main characters. It's kind of got a fun dynamic because Jared is not an alpha in terms of the Omegaverse, but he has always kind of acted as such in his relationships in the past, whereas Calder is like an alpha, and so Jared gets alpha, and it's funny. I like it was just a fun dynamic and very different than other books in like the Omegaverse that I've read. So I enjoyed this one. I thought it was fun. Lost and Bound, on the other hand, actually follows 2 other wolf shifters that were held captive in the same place at the same time as Jared and Calder, and when Jared and Calder escaped, they let these guys go as well. As a result of the imprisonment and experiments that were done on him while he was there, Ash is unable to like feel things, like feel pain or pleasure, which I didn't think was written the best, because some things you could feel and some things you couldn't. It didn't really make a lot of sense, to be honest. I don't know. I didn't love the relationship in this one. I actually feel like, thinking back on it, it's maybe more of a 3-star read, because a little bit of the dynamic made me uncomfy because of the smut scenes when Ash like couldn't feel, like he could feel what was going on, but it wasn't pleasurable for him. He was just pleasuring his partner. I don't know. I felt weird about that. But basically, the plot of this book isn't as good either, because it starts after they've escaped and Ash is just being kept safe by Drew in Drew's house, and Ash like doesn't remember his previous life, so he's just there and existing and vibing, and eventually they go and try and figure out what Ash was doing prior to being kidnapped, but there's not, I don't know. There wasn't a lot of resolution there. I didn't like this one as much. This was honestly probably one of my least favorite books in this series. So yeah, as a whole, I do enjoy the series, and I think it's a fun time and worth the read. I would probably put next on my list Stay Awake by Megan Golden. This is the one thriller that I read this month, and I actually did think it was a pretty solid thriller, and we're following our main character Liv, and Liv wakes up in the back of a cab at the very beginning of this book with the words "Stay Awake" written across her hand, and she has no idea how she got there. She doesn't remember anything, but there's a bloody knife in her pocket. She has the cab drop her off at her apartment. She goes up to her apartment. Other people live there. It's not her apartment anymore. And she's like, what in the hell is going on? Then she realizes, after she sees on the news that there has been a murder, that perhaps she is somehow connected to this murder and she's on the run. And so she must try and figure out what the hell is going on. But every time she falls asleep, she forgets the last 3 years of her life. So it's a struggle, to say the least. Like I said, I thought this was a really solid thriller. Ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. I thought it was very compelling. It did get a bit repetitive and frustrating, but I did really like in the end how the crime was solved. It felt very forensic-y, detective-y to me. I liked the explanation of why what happened. I don't know. That's like a small kind of detail, but I did really enjoy that. I also liked Liv as a main character. Even though she's an unreliable narrator, I actually quite liked her as a character and was really rooting for her and sympathizing with her. So I thought that was a mark of a good thriller, to have me root for the main character, even though she's definitely like unreliable, morally gray. I don't know. I really liked it. I thought it was good. I thought it was solid. It's definitely not going to be like a favorite book of the year, but I would recommend if you're looking for a fun thriller. Now we're getting into 4-star territory, and my first 4-star book that I want to talk about is New Moon by Stephanie Meyer. Of course, the Twilight series is a classic series. Everyone probably knows what it's about. It's about Edward the vampire and Bella the human falling in love. There's a bit of a plot twist in New Moon, and our love triangle is introduced with Jacob the werewolf. Yes, New Moon, I feel like, is a lot of people's least favorite in the series, but it's not my least favorite. Clips is my least favorite. favorite. So I enjoyed rereading this book. This is obviously a reread for me. I have a reading vlog on my channel of this book from like 2020 and that wasn't the first time I read this book either. So I couldn't even tell you how many times I have read it, but I've loved reading it every time. I really like the times when Jacob and Bella are just friends. I appreciate how he is there for her and helps her out. I do think that this book is not the best. I think that Edward has a complete personality transplant and that he does things in this book that are really don't make sense with the character he is portrayed to be in the first book. But I do love these books. I think they're a fun time. I definitely think that they have problematic elements and I think those should always be discussed and called out, and I would be the first to do so. Yet these books hold a lot of nostalgia for me and I just think they're very compulsively readable and a fun story to revisit. I did give this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed reading this, and if you didn't know, I'm reading this because I am a co-host for the Twilight Read Along. We are doing that through the end of the year. It's definitely not too late to join if you want to hop in now. October, we're reading Eclipse as well as The Short Second Life of Brie Tanner, discussing those and watching the Eclipse movie. So definitely jump on if you want to. I will leave the Discord linked in the description. That's where we announce live shows and movie nights. So even if you just want to watch the movies with us, come join. It's a fun time. Next book on my list is Read Between the Lines by Rachel Lacey. This is an FF contemporary rom-com and it was a lot of fun, really cute. I gave it 4 stars. This book follows Rosie and Jane. Rosie is a bookstore owner whose lease is unfortunately expiring on her bookstore and she has to find a new place to move to in the big city of New York. It's not a lot of options, nothing is speaking to her, but she is somewhat comforted by her flirty online relationship with the author Brie that writes her favorite lesbian romance books. Turns out Brie is also Jane, and Jane is also the landlord of Rosie's building, is the one that delivers her lease ending notice. So we're dealing with the anonymous trope where they are anonymously talking to one another online and also know each other in real life, and then their real life relationship is very contentious. We have enemies to lovers vibes going on. Overall, this was a really fun, believable romance. I really enjoyed it and I loved Jane and Rosie's dynamic, and I liked seeing them work through the conflicts that they have because I thought it was done very well and very realistically. I also just thought their romance was super sweet and cute. There were some good spicy scenes in this book as well. Another fun tidbit, if you're interested in this book, it is on Kindle Unlimited, and through Kindle Unlimited you can also get the audiobook on Audible for free. A steal, amazing. We love that. And that's actually how I consumed this book. I listened to it on audio. Very good audiobook. The one thing I will say about this book is, one, it had a very formulaic structure in terms of typical traditionally published romances with the stupid third act conflict, which a lot of KU books don't tend to have. So the fact that this one had it, I was a little annoyed. Another thing that I didn't love was that Jane's family owns this development business in New York City that basically buys up old buildings and gentrifies them. It's discussed a little bit how this is damaging to the people who own or rent these buildings and have lots of history in them and things, but it's never really challenged or unpacked in the way that I wanted it to be, which is definitely a decent negative of this story, especially because in the end it's kind of justified by it's just a job, it's just work. And I really expected that to be challenged a little bit more. Jane does challenge it, but her sister and her family are still doing it and they're still, I don't know. I just wanted to see a little bit more discussion and firm stance against gentrification in that way, if that makes sense. I thought it needed to go into that topic a little bit deeper since it was brought up in general, Next book, Lunatic by Only James. This is the 6th book in her Necessary Evil series that I've been obsessed with this year, and this is the most recent release. It came out on August 31st and I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was fun. I'm sure you've heard this spiel before if you've been on my channel. The Necessary Evil series follows the Mulvaney family. They are a family of 7 brothers who are all adopted by Thomas Mulvaney because they are psychopaths, exhibited psychopathic tendencies as young children. Thomas adopted them and trained them to be assassins, to take out all of the bad guys in society that the system can't or didn't properly arrest or take care of. So that is what these brothers do, and each book is another of the brothers' HEA and romance. Lunatic is Archer's book. Archer is the gambling alcoholic brother, and he gets together with Mac Shepard, who is the brother of another character from another of Only James's series, the Elite Protection Services series. I liked that crossover that all of her books tend to take place in the same world. I just thought that was fun. And yeah, basically Archer and Mac have this like casual hookup thing going on, but of course this book is the failed casual trope. So yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. I definitely liked it better than the 5th book, which is probably like my least favorite in the series. So I'm glad we're like going back up after that one. I really liked Archer and Mac as characters. I liked their dynamic. I thought they were cute together. I liked the tropes in this book, and I thought that the plot of this one was better than the last couple have been. I also liked how much Adam and Noah were featured in this book. They have very prominent roles. They're the characters of the 1st book and my favorite couple in this series. So yeah, I liked this one. That was fun. 4.5 stars. All right, now we're down to my top 3, and a surprise standout from this month was Dark Cravings by Joel Abernathy. This was a book that was like 450 pages on KU, which is typically way too long for me to read on KU, but I read the description and I'm like, this sounds so good. Like, I'm just gonna read the first chapter and see if it gets me hooked. Get me hooked, it did. I read this in 24 hours. I thought it was so good. This is a paranormal fantasy book. It follows Eddie, who's a wolf shifter, Castor, who is a hunter of the Sanguine Church, and in this world, the Sanguine Church is an organization that hunts like rogue vampires and shifters that are killing off innocent people, and to give themselves powers, they actually inject themselves with wolf or vampire blood, but they filter out the chemical that actually would make them turn into a vampire or a wolf shifter, so they get the powers without actually being the creature. Eddie was somebody that was forcibly turned into a wolf shifter. He really doesn't know exactly what happened, and he is captured by the Sanguine Church because he's just on a rampage when he's first turned. He doesn't know how to turn back. He doesn't know what's going on. So he's held captive for a while until he can finally like shift back to being human and kind of prove himself, and he acts as like a vessel for them to draw the blood from, but he develops like a super strong infatuation with Castor and just like is obsessed with him and just wants to be near him at all times. And this is very one-sided. Castor actually hates wolf shifters because wolf shifters killed his family, so he's very like prejudiced against Eddie, but he can only resist the attention for so long. And Eddie actually like is on such good behavior that they eventually start training him to be a hunter. So Castor is tasked with training Eddie, and they get closer in this way and become like partners and stuff. There are also so many other moving parts to this book, but I don't want to spoil anything in case you're interested in reading this, and I definitely would recommend. I would categorize this as like a dark paranormal urban fantasy with strong romance subplot. I really thought it was great. I gave it 4.5 stars. Pretty much the major reason that I deducted a half star was because some of the like early smut scenes were a little harsh for my taste. I like a little bit of a sweeter sweeter scenes, and these are a little bit aggressive, but by the end they get sweeter and nicer. I don't know. The smut was just like not quite my taste. So that's where the half star came off. But I felt like Joel Abernathy created such a rich, like interesting fantasy world, and I can't wait to read more books in this series. I thought this was great and definitely a like surprise favorite of the month. My second favorite book of the month was actually another reread, and that was The Diviners by Libba Bray. I read this for the Fan Series Book Club. This is our current and last series of the year, so if you're interested, definitely jump in with us. I still haven't read Layer of James, the second book, which we'll be talking about this month in October, so feel free to join us. But I really loved Diviners. I thought it was so good. Gave it a strong 4.5 stars. This book is set in the 1920s in this world where magic does exist. We're following our main character Evie, who has the ability to divine people's secrets from objects that they own when she holds them. And Evie's a bit of a rebel, so she gets sent to stay with her uncle because her parents can't really deal with her in this small town that she's in. She gets into a bit of trouble, so they send her away to New York, and Evie's like, this is not a punishment. I am ready to go to New York. And once there, her uncle owns this weird museum of mysterious objects, and he's also kind of started to be drawn into this investigation of these murders that are happening in New York City. And come to find out, these murders are all connected to this being called Father John, who's trying to complete all of these sacrifices to like rise as a demon or something. Something kind of paranormal is going on. I just thought that this book was so well written. I listened to the audiobook while I read along physically, and that was like the perfect way to consume this book because the audiobook is so good and then you don't miss anything because you're following along. I just loved all of the characters. I thought Evie was hilarious, and I loved how like headstrong and stubborn she was. I thought she was so funny. I loved all the side characters too, like Jericho and Theta and Memphis, and I'm so excited to continue reading this series. I think it is like so rich, so well written, so lovely, and like it's one of those books that you kind of forget you're reading when you're reading it because it just is so encompassing and just draws you in, and I loved it so much. I thought it was so good. All right, and finally, my best book of the month was, of course, Seraph by Lily Mayne. This is her most recent release in her Monstrous series. This is the 6th book, I think. Yes, the 6th book. It was so good. It was so good. These are all monster romances set in an apocalyptic America. The apocalypse happened because there was a tear in the universe and monsters came over into America. So now the earth is being shared by monsters and humans. Most humans live on the coasts in these like military controlled cities, where the middle of the US is called the Waste, and there are some people that live out there, but mostly just monsters. A lot of our main human characters live this camp in the Wastes, and that is the case with Lilac, the main character of Seraph. And Lilac is kind of like the quiet, creepy assassin of this camp, but really he's just like a soft cinnamon roll, and he's such a baby. I love him. He develops this like care and kind of obsession for Seraph, who is this monster that was brought to the camp previously because some of the other characters felt bad for him. He had nowhere else to go. At the beginning of the story, he's kept in a cage outside of the camp because he is deemed very dangerous, very volatile. He just kind of screams all day and tries to attack anyone that gets close to the cage. But it is because he is in pain from these experiments that were being done to him by the military. And Lilac is really the only one that treats him like a human, like a person, and Lilac just sits out there with him and talks to him and gains his trust, finally like helps him with his pain and everything that's going on. It's so sweet. I wasn't quite sure how I would feel about this one, but it was so sweet and cute, and I loved it. Our characters are so sweet to each other and they were so cute, and I just love how they would like defend each other to the ends of the earth. Also, the smut scenes in this book, very inventive. They were good. I'm blushing. Anyway, I loved this book. I thought it was so good. It's definitely not my favorite in the series, but it was a full 5 stars. I loved it. All right, and those were all 14 things that I read, mostly, in September. Let me know if you have any good books you have read recently. Please let me know what they are in the comments. I always am looking for good book recommendations. Also, if you liked this video, I'd really appreciate if you liked it. And if you would like to see more videos from me, most of them featuring queer and diverse books, definitely subscribe to my channel. I would love to have you. You can also follow me on Instagram and Goodreads. Those are the 2 platforms that I am most active on outside of YouTube. Always linked in the description down below. Also, all these books that I talked about are linked down below through Amazon. If you purchase through my link, I earn like a little tiny commission. So if you'd like to support my channel in that way, I would really appreciate that as well. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that is everything for today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.